Okay, we're live. Hello to zero people who are currently watching this right now. I have a good friend of mine, John Buck. He's from Twitter. He is a former screenwriter, a Catholic convert, and he has a deep interest in philosophy. Philosophy and theology. So I decided to bring him on here to talk about one of the biggest philosophical problems within Christianity, the problem of evil and why God permits evil.
Yeah.
So, um,
Howdy.
yeah.
Quick correction.
So,
I'm not really a screenwriter. I've written a couple of screenplays just as a hobby. And I had aspirations at one point to be a screenwriter. But I don't know. It's fine if I can be a former amateur screenwriter. How about that?
Oh yeah. So you want to give some more background detail on yourself, man?
Yeah, sure. So I was actually raised in a, I guess, Hebrew roots household, which is sort of like evangelical Christianity that has almost rediscovered the Old Testament in a sort of sense, and trying to live biblically in the sense of restoring a almost pre-Christian way of life, while somehow still incorporating sort of the teachings of Jesus and the New Testament into their day-to-day living. So there's a sense in which they're living as Jews, even in a sort of context of America and things like that. So it's a sort of offshoot of, sort of evangelical Christianity. That's how I was raised. And then from growing up, I became more interested in, what sort of reasons I had for holding to the faith that I did, that I grew up in, and also became a lot more open to discovering and exploration into philosophy and other religions and things like that, and until eventually seeking out what was the early Christian church like, and then considering Eastern Orthodoxy for a good period of time for 2 years before eventually converting into Catholicism to where I am now currently. And I converted 2 years ago Easter. So but I still love philosophy and still love sort of thinking deeply and critically about different things, and especially the problem of evil. That was one thing that I always found it a sort of troubling sort of problem to sort of wrestle with, especially given discovering a lot more of the depravity within nature that you might not really get from growing up in a sort of young earth creationist household. But so in sort of discovering the much further depths of natural evil that occurs within the animal kingdom, that's something that led me to try to get a better understanding of the problem of evil, and have since developed a sort of theodicy that I wouldn't say is totally unique to me. It's just, I don't know, maybe refined in a particular way by me, that I call the participation theodicy, that I wrote a couple papers on, but I'm guessing we'll probably go into that at some point in this conversation.
Okay. I guess since we're on the problem of evil, for a lot of people who are even religious, and for a lot of non-believers, it always goes to the question is, if God is so powerful, why doesn't come down from heaven and just say, this is wrong, that what you guys are doing is wrong, you should not be enslaving people, you should not mass murder people based on creed, race, or nationality? That's the question they always ask. How would you respond to that question?
I would want to sort of respond by saying that, yes, given God's power and goodness, he certainly could and would have reason to say, inform everyone regarding the things that they're doing wrong, and correct them in that. But there's a question that we can ask of whether or not God's doing so wholly by himself would really be the best way in which he could do that thing. So there's this sort of principle I'll be working off of, that's the good of participation, to where if something would be good for one being to do it, but he could achieve that same thing through another being also contributing towards the bringing about of that good thing, it's going to be better in some sense because you have two people performing the good action rather than just one. Um, and so the idea is that, yeah, God could have created like everything in a perfect state of affairs to where like everything is good and everything like that, but it would have been done solely by God himself. And there would be no other creatures that participated in bringing about that good thing. So, because God is so generous with the bringing about of good things, he decided to allow creatures to help participate in the bringing about those good things. But in order to do so, of course, that would require initially creating creatures in a world that isn't yet perfect, so that those creatures could help contribute towards the bringing about of the perfection of that world. So, regarding that sort of classic example of like, why isn't it the case that God just sort of like divinely reveals to everyone the what actions are right and what actions are wrong? We could say that, yeah, that would be a good world for God to create, and I do think that like our world will is like in process of becoming that type of world, but God allows creatures to help take it through that process to become that type of world, to where through our actions we can help each other um, re- recognize what's good and what's right and what's wrong, and help each other to develop uh, more moral pathways with regards to all of our deeds and our actions in this world. And so that's why God allows us to live in a world in which, yeah, it's not always obviously clear what the right thing is at this point, is so that we as creatures can help, I don't know, learn basically what we should be doing and be praiseworthy for that fact. Like the fact that we're able to help each other learn what we should be doing allows us to be somewhat praiseworthy for doing those things. Whereas in the other occasion, if God were to just do it all by himself, he would be the only one of praise in that world. So God's sort of like allowing us to help, allowing us to share in that sort of praiseworthiness by allowing us to participate in the bringing about of that great world. So sorry for kind of rambling on a little bit there, but
Oh, oh, you're good. You're good. Just another question that's another classical question is that's opposed on Christians is also why do we suffer so much in this world as well? Suffering and contending with evil, especially with people being so good. Like for example, Job, because the God permitted Satan to cast ruin onto Job, except for the fact that outright killing him. And throughout the story, there is arguments that Job has done wrong or Job was not worthy of God's, or all those arguments that were presented by his friends. And even then, Joe himself, who still believed in God just basically questioned, why is this happening to me? I demand justice from you. Then God went to basically came down from heaven, basically answered Joe's question. And it's a very long and complicated speech he went on, but it's more so that the main message of that speech, through my grace that you are living, that is my blessing. I love you because you exist. And that and what I read recently from the Catholic introduction of the Bible, that Job's suffering is a direct parallel to the suffering of Christ. And that they were both suffering and they didn't understand the plan. They didn't understand what's going on, and they just were praying to God like this. But God, at least in Job, did explain that I did explain the whole mysteries of the universe and all of this workings of the universe, and what do you know about the workings of everything. And that just leads to this that just through my mercy that you are living and breathing, and that the fact that we live and breathe every day is a extension of grace. And that does not answer why we suffer and suffering right now, because again, Job was a holy man, And I guess the text suggests that sinning and suffering is not a correlation,
Right.
that suffering is a part of this world, that we all have to suffer and we all have to endure. And I think it's up to people to find meaning within that suffering and to find goodness, see what we learn to ultimately promote goodness within ourselves and with our communities and our families. Because I don't know, there's a good quote that no progress can be made about struggle, essentially. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, it
And
is. Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
I mean, just these are hard questions,
Right.
and a lot of people may not find this, especially questioning people, may not find it satisfactory. But this is just the one view to look at it, to place ourselves, to contextualize ourselves in this world.
Mm.
You know.
Yeah. There are there's a sense in which like the suffering that we sort of go through and endure can help our like moral character in a sense, to where like if we were just given everything whenever we wanted it, we might be like sort of haughty and like like really bratty sort of people that just sort of got whatever they wanted. And the 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 ability to sort of endure suffering with grace is itself a kind of virtuous aspect that somebody can develop, even in occasions in which they can't do anything at all except for enduring it. Which, yeah, was the case for somebody like Job and for plenty of people, where they're just stuck in bad situations that they have to sort of go through. Yeah, I'm not sure if that is an adequate answer though, as to like why is it that people suffer, because I don't know, if we think of God as like putting us into situations in which we are going to suffer so that we will ultimately like develop better moral characters and things like that, almost seems like God is like using our suffering as a means to his end, which I don't know, on some moral basis could be considered a sort of like immoral action. Like you could, I don't know, you could think about like Jigsaw from the Saw franchise, who basically puts people into situations that they have to go through. And yeah, maybe if it were the case that like, oh, having gone through that whole set of situations, they've developed a deeper love of life and things like that, then like, yeah, maybe that would be kind of like a good outcome, but not really like a perfectly moral sort of a means to achieve that outcome. So I don't know. I think at least with regards to like Job's suffering, or the suffering that we see in this life of good people, I'd want to say more so it's not that like God puts them into those situations to like develop their moral character, but it's just a sort of fact about the world that in its incomplete state, there are going to be those that suffer unjustly. And yes, God could have prevented the world from having those sorts of things occurring within it, but then that would have prevented creatures from being able to contribute towards the idealization of the world. And so, yeah, maybe like as God sort of talks about in the book of Job, is like Job doesn't know the end from the beginning. Like there's a lot more to this picture going on here than Job is able to realize at his current state. And so, like, yeah, given our current state of ignorance, we're just sort of going to have to be content with the fact that, like, look, I'm pretty sure that I'm not doing anything wrong here, but I'm just going to endure it because I put my trust in God. And yeah, that's always going to be sort of the right move, I think.
Just may not always understand it because we're human beings. The book of Job is a very human story. Like Job is not Job. To be clear, Job was a holy man, but he was also a very flawed man. To understand that, and it really goes down to like there is just a very keen psychological insight when we're just, because the reality is just it takes one thing, one mistake to just set our life out of balance, and it takes a very long time to just claw back, to have everything we lost to recover some of it in the long run of things back.
Yeah.
It's a like it's a very difficult and it's a very emotional thing because we all are just going through something,
Hmm.
and this is just this is why I like the Book of Job as a story. Like it's like one of my favorite books in the Bible is that it is all going to mean something in the end. And
Hmm.
I guess with my recent investigations of Christianity, and my conclusion is just that God works through us, and that is always up to us to derive meaning
Hmm.
of why we went through this and why we have to be better people before it. For it, that's how we gain wisdom
Hmm.
in the end.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
because
Interesting. Yeah.
wisdom is not gained through just okay. There should be a difference between wisdom and knowledge. We can gain a bunch of knowledge, but wisdom we gain through sorrow
Hmm.
more often than not.
Right. Right.
Yeah. So
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. There's this book I read from a survivor from Auschwitz, Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning, and yeah, it does have that sort of similar sort of I guess theme or uh, conclusion that he's drawing. That like the meaning is sort of up to us to derive from our suffering, and like that's like if you don't have some sort of meaning uh, to develop from that, it almost makes the suffering for naught. So you kind of have to settle with whatever meaning that you can get. But I don't know. I found that like reading that book really practical for myself, and just sort of rethinking about the um, occasions that in my own life, and like ah, not only just like comparing it to like somebody who suffered through Auschwitz, but also just sort of like giving me a sort of system of being able to endure whatever life might come, whether yeah, and just being I don't know, a little bit more stoic in the occasion, the things that happen to you in this life. But I found that really practical in that sense.
yeah, it's just and and another contention that people may have to non-believers or skeptics that relates to the problem of free will
Mm.
is is actually yeah, it does relates to the problem of evil, but it also relates to free will, because free will is essential to Christian theology.
Hmm.
Well, to certain sects of Christian
Right. Yeah.
theologies. We're not Calvinists, to be clear. I am
Right.
not a Calvinist. John Buck is not a Calvinist.
Yeah.
We do not believe in predestination. Sorry, sorry. I don't like Calvin. I cannot say I'm a fan of Calvinism.
Right. Yeah.
That's I'm not alone, but um, it goes to the question of like from earlier, like within the Bible, within scriptures, particularly in Numbers, Leviticus, and well, not Numbers, but Leviticus and Deuteronomy, the Mosaic Law,
Hmm.
and people often bring up objections of like, why did such a holy people like the children of God, the children of Israel, permitted slavery, permitted all these what seems barbaric to us, to modern readers. And this does not even include slavery, but also include how to treat slaves, also how to treat women, how to do this, and all these very uh, extremes and drastic measures of punishment, which includes more often includes death or execution.
Hmm.
And people will just ask, like, will fairly ask, like, why would God permit such a barbaric code? Which, well, let me put this in emphasis to modern readers, and that's been like a big contention for me.
Hmm.
I've been talking to people about this, about why did such a holy God permit the practice of slavery, and I also seen you talk about this on Twitter. So how would
Hmm.
you respond to that?
Yeah. So I think a good way to sort of think about the Bible is a a book written by people and God in sort of going over the salvation history of humanity. And I think that um, read linearly, you can sort of see a progression uh, of of Revelation as you go through it. And I think part of that progression is going to be in our, I guess, let's say, moral understanding, to where like God, in trying to reveal himself to a barbaric people, will be God's greatest virtues will be seen, will be to those barbaric people things that we wouldn't typically, or like as we progress out of that, be seen as quite as virtuous. So for like a war-torn culture, if they were to think about God as like the greatest possible being, they would obviously think of God as sort of like a war captain or something like that. And I think that that sort of conception of God is going to be, I guess, baked into their sort of cultural articulations of God and how they viewed God's relation to us and to the world. And so I think there's going to be occasions in which like they'll depict God as like commanding certain things like a genocide or something like that, because that was their conception of what a God would have to be and what a God would call for them to be doing, just given their own sort of cultural dispositions or cultural sort of like, I don't know, framing of things. And so as history progresses and salvation histories also progresses, there's going to be a further development of how we understand ourselves and how we understand God, and the relationships between ourselves and also ourselves in relation to God, to where a slavery is no longer seen as something that would be, for one, necessary or even morally fitting at all. So yeah, in answering the question, why would God allow um, his book basically to contain uh, prescriptions for slavery, for how to take care of slaves and how to do it, things like that, is just going to be the case that it's going to be because of the fact that God's book doesn't just include him as an author, it includes people themselves as an author through history. So from a historical standpoint, it's going to have certain historical cultural assumptions laden within it. And then from that, as culture develops and as God is sort of like bringing people up from their more barbaric positions, people are going to be able, or we're able to see more clearly the immorality of slavery and things like that. So it's sort of tied into my earlier response to the problem of evil, that like God is allowing us creatures to participate in the development of the good things that God is wanting to sort of bring to us. And so those good things are going to include a good moral code. And so in order for us to sort of like contribute towards the development of that good moral code, we're going to have to initially like start off in a basis of like, well, it's not a perfect moral code that we're sort of like starting off with. And a lot of it is going to be like human sort of like origins in some sense. So yeah.
Yeah, just it's since a lot of this information is not available to the American public, unfortunately, but to understand the the laws within Leviticus and Deuteronomy, and I feel like I'm forgetting a third book, but that
Numbers.
could, yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure Numbers is. I'm not sure Numbers is a contains laws. I could be wrong, but yeah. But within those two, maybe three books,
Mhm.
it was not for. It was really for specifically, as you said, it was for that time period. It was for that ancient kind of people within their culture. God, it's been said that God often works within whatever cultural space of people that he's operating in,
Mhm.
and that, and this is to say that these laws and rituals and these codes were never meant to be absolute. It was never supposed to. It was not designed to be a perfect moral law. This was just for the covenant that they had at the time,
Mm-hmm.
with the Israelites and God. It was imperfect, and the Israelites made modification to these codes because they were just it was just judicial and cultural wisdom at the time.
Mm.
And to get into a little sidebar here, from what I understand, that a lot of these laws were surprisingly humane given the time periods.
Mm.
From my understanding, from my research into it,
Mm.
like slavery in the Bible. Just to put this for the record, slavery in the Bible is not what we think of it. What many modern people think of it is not chattel slavery in the South and in South America, I believe.
Mm.
It was a form of debt. It was often a form of debt slavery, which doesn't make it any better. Just to be clear, we are not saying that slavery in the Bible is justified. We're more so just giving context of the slavery that was practiced in the ancient world, which it
Mm.
was often a form of indentured servitude. And given the instructions, it was quite progressive at the time. This is just this is me just giving context to it. You're to people who will be watching this later. We're not justifying it. We are not apologizing for it. We're just understanding that this was the moral law for a people who are not ready for such moral revelations over and oftentimes you mentioned progressive revelations, the doctrine, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's it suggests that over time we as a people, we as humanity will have to learn that these such beings are wrong, and that just because it's real easy for a modern reader to say God should have just came down and just said said that yeah, slavery is wrong, rape is wrong, war is wrong, but that's not how that works, because oftentimes it takes that we have to acknowledge that we are agents. We are free agents. Human beings are free agents. We are not automatons to be programmed. We are not machines to be set forth, because God never intended us to be like that. He intended us to be creatures that will come to him willingly, that will come to accept his mercy, so we can be with him again in paradise.
Mm.
And we have to learn for ourselves what is right and what is wrong, because we invited evil into the world. We invited suffering to the world because it's go back to Genesis, and that we must decipher what is right and what is wrong for ourselves so we can return back to God. That's why free will is essentially important, that it's all a way that we return back to God and turn back to God to see him and hear him and to accept him. That's that's pretty much it. I hope I didn't go on too long, guys.
No, you're good. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
No, yeah. It like I don't know. Like there's a sense in which like I can like theoretically understand Calvinism as like a component of Christianity. Like, yeah, I guess there are some like arguments for compatibilism regarding free will and things like that. And then yeah, so if those technically work, then you don't technically need like free will with Christianity. But like at least for me, like I don't know, free will is so like crucial to my like moral understanding of things that like if I were to like adopt a view without free will, it would be like I don't know, sort of like upheave all of my previous sort of thinking, and I don't know how plausible the Christian story would really seem to me without that sort of core component to it. At least for me, though. Maybe for Calvinists, it's easier for them, but yeah.
Oh, cow. Oh, those Calvinists. But, it's often, I guess, the most uncomfortable thing. Okay, this is gonna be a little, I know, I guess another important thing for me with my development, with my moral and intellectual development recently, is just reading literature.
Hmm.
Like literature outside the Bible, obviously, but just
Hmm.
reading like literature that just goes really hard and just present a very visceral look into humanity and our relationship with the natural world itself. Like,
Hmm.
like I showed you this earlier. This book, Blood Meridian,
Hmm.
classic. Rest in peace, Cormac McCarthy. Because that's a book that really unapologetically um, take a look at the darkness that resides within the human heart, and also juxtaposing it with beautiful descriptions and imagery of nature itself and
Hmm.
nature of creation.
Hmm.
And you have such a wild character such as Judge Holden, who is, many people debate this, what Judge Holden actually represented. I believe he is the devil himself within the story,
Hmm.
and it's it shows that it shows that literature. I'm just saying that it shows that literature can elevate a certain understanding and a deeper moral understanding of the world we live in, the people we are dealing with, because human beings, especially back during those times, and we live comfortably in the West, that violence and evil is a factor. And I feel like since we live in such a comfortable period,
Hmm.
and that we're blessed to not to experience these things, but we have to understand that evil does exist, and oftentimes that evil is in fact a product of man's works, that is often the devising of humanity to inflict such carnage and terribleness. And there's always going to be people who are like Judge Holden, terrifyingly enough,
Hmm.
that they want to be like God. They want to control these things and perpetuate misery and extinguish whoever good whoever goodness, because in the worldview of Judge Holden, that war is God, that war is the ultimate way to decipher meaning or any meaning
Hmm.
in the world, which
Hmm.
is a very terrifying which is a very terrifying thought. And if
Hmm.
he's supposed to be this demonic being, and which, by the way, he's kind of based off on Satan in Paradise Lost, which is another great work of literature,
Hmm.
it it shows that the roots of evil will always comes from man, and the reason why suffering exists, and this is going on to my little thought process, but the reason why suffering do exist is that we're tempered by it, so we can know from right from wrong, that there has to be meaning within our choices, because there is a reason why God gave us so much agency in the first place. And it's all in the reason that we can return to goodness, but it's our choice to return. But it's our choice in the end of the day. We can reject him or we can accept him. This is why suffering do exist as a means to just temper us, and also understand that suffering. I mean, that to also understand that evil reside in us, that we are capable of doing such great evil and harm to each other.
Hmm.
And we also have to be mindful that we do not fall into our own delusions, that we do not fall into our what we ultimately at the time view to be right, because that's a very dangerous thing, is falling into our own self delusions, because Satan in Paradise Lost was very delusional, very was very much, in fact, he said he was doing it for liberty, that he was revolting against God, because he wanted to free the angels. He wanted to be is, but in truth, he was a jealous and spiteful, manipulative being, like like a creature that is a deceitful creature that will crawl on his belly.
Mm-hmm.
So we just have to be mindful of that. That's just that it it matters, and that kind of leads to another question
Mm-hmm.
that kind of questions God and his morality. Is that throughout the Old Testament that God is very wrathful, very very dramatic with his shows of power, and people will point out that why does God is killing these people? They often ask these questions about of God's wrath. Why God? Basically asking, if God is so loving, why is he wrathful? Why is he jealous? Why is he X, Y, and Z essentially? And how would you respond to that?
Yeah. So kind of like what I was saying earlier with regards to like the laws of Moses is that the Bible contains uh, writings not just from God but also from men. And I think that historically the depictions of God as being totally wrathful and like full of anger and spite and like doing things which from modern ears might seem like totally morally reproachable, or would it be unreproachable? Yeah, reproachable. Is just it's the fact that like God allows himself to be characterized, even if that characterization isn't totally accurate. And so, like I don't think that God himself is like inherently wrathful as he's sometimes depicted in scriptures. Because, well, for one, because I think that God is impassible and that like there's nothing we can do that can change God's like internal state of like how he experiences reality. But also because that like wrath is itself something that is, I don't know, it's more of a virtue from a more barbaric sort of mindset to where like in an occasion in which like might is what sort of like secures you dinner and secures you a sort of like mate and a way of life, then I can see how wrath would be seen as a virtue, and so it'd be appropriate from that perspective to attribute that virtue to God, to say that he is a wrathful being. But in a further development of our understanding and our place in the world, where wrath is itself no longer really necessary, it would be no longer appropriate to sort of attribute that virtue to God, and that's why a sort of progressive revelation of God's nature as being totally loving starts to form and develop, especially within Christianity. But there is a sense in which, like, I do think, like, it can still be appropriate to say that God is wrathful towards certain things. Like, I think it can be right to say that God, like, hates sin. And I think his hatred or wrath towards sin is going to be derived out of his ultimately love for his creation. So, like, the reason that God might hate it that John or somebody sins is because he loves John and he wants to see the best for John. And so he knows that for John to perform some sinful action is itself degrading to John. And so God loves John, and that's why he hates it whenever John like acts out sinfully or something like that, or does something that sort of is detrimental towards his own character. And so I think, there's a few different answers. So we could like, in order to like still read the Bible in a way that's relevant to ourselves, you can sort of like go the originist sort of route and saying that when the psalmist David talks about how he wishes that God would dash my enemies in little ones against the rock. Origin was saying like, well, we can sort of reinterpret that to think that, when we're to read that, we're to we're to understand the little ones of the enemy to be sins. And so, yeah, there's a true sense in which we should also pray that imprecatory prayer, that like we should desire that God dashes our sins against the rocks and to annihilate them and destroy them with great sort of vigor and wrath, you could say. So yeah, that's a few different approaches that I would sort of take to that whole question.
So yeah, I've lost my train of thought, but on that point, this goes into the New Testament. This goes into the story of Jesus and what his sacrifice ultimately represent, because he dies a death that we're supposed to die. That's the common line. It goes through the fact that God is willing to take the form of flesh into his son Jesus, because Jesus is God, but he is also willing to sacrifice himself to give us a second chance. That is not. It goes into your point of progressive revelations or progressive development in Catholic, is in much more stricter Catholic terms. It's important to understand the weight. I think this is a very uncomfortable thing for a lot of people, but it goes into an understanding that the cross that Jesus was carrying and the cross that I think he fell upon in the desert was supposed to symbolize the weight of humanity's evil, the weight of humanity's sins, and that he was crucified for it, to just give us that second chance at life. It's important. And back in the Old Testament, where God was wrathful, he was often wrathful because the people were doing evil inside of him. Like, it goes to the book of Judges that the Israelites did evil in the sight of the Lord, and he delivered them onto their oppressors. Until he raised a judge to deliver them out of their hands. It's to understand that at the end of the day, it's a consistent thing throughout the Bible that humanity will often turn away against God, but he always have an out plan. There's always hope. There's always deliverance coming. And we may wander off the path, but it's always our choice to get on the path again. So it's important for Christians to really understand like the weight of Jesus' sacrifice, and it's hard, and it's very emotional. It's very emotional. You just read the story. If you read the story of his crucifixion and what Jesus himself went through, because as the song "Sympathy for the Devil," he has his moment of doubt and pain. And we have to relate ourselves in that position and just allow ourselves to understand that, and just be overwhelmed by the enormity of it, because that is many way that is love. That is the ultimate form of love, and that love comes in sacrifice, and that the tragedy within it all is that this man didn't have to die, but he chose to walk this path. So
yeah, no, it's like, it's very much the sort of pinnacle moment of history, and for good reason, because it has so much meaning within it, and like just it's worthwhile to like try to wrap your head around the mystery of the atonement, and to get a better understanding of its purpose and what it did and what it is doing and what it shall continue to be doing. Being able to sort of like understand it in its full presence is itself difficult, but it's still worth doing.
Yes. So much theology to learn, so little time.
Yeah.
It's it's the problem in evil, the problem in suffering. I think it's always that it just always go to the fact that I guess we as believers, we have to, if we want to talk about this, we always need to, it has to be from approach of empathy to understand that these are questions, that these are answers, and we have to just say to them, these are hard answers. These are hard questions, and we can only just answer them honestly as best as they can, and just that people may just find that dissatisfying, but it's it's worth it in the end. We're doing we're doing good, and even if we have our doubts, and even if we have our own struggles to overcome, it's it's helpful to believe that something is better on the way for everybody, even though it may not seem like it sometimes, because people will ask God, like, why am I poor? Why am I in poverty? Why did he make my mama poor? Why did he do these things to us? And just it's just that since we have the ability to choose, there's always a way to lift ourselves up from those circumstances. It's always the opportunity to do so. We just have to hear it and watch it for it. It may not always be obvious, but with time and self-reflection, you realize this. If it wasn't for this circumstance or experience, I wouldn't be here in this place right now. So,
yeah. And yeah, that could definitely be a really healthy mindset to take with you, like whenever you're faced with some sort of situation that you're sort of struggling with, is to like think of it as not a burden that's placed onto you for no reason at all, but it's an opportunity given to you with the expectation or hope that you'll be able to do something incredible out of that. Yeah.
Just sometimes like we all been through, like, just going back to the Bible is just, it's a very, it's been divinely inspired, but there is a lot of realism in terms of human emotions, that what these prophets have gone through. Moses himself is like in the beginning of Exodus, Moses himself was like, I don't want to do this. I'm not a good speaker or whatever, and just like, you will do this because basically God is like, in the Bible, it's just like God just essentially bitch out Job to do it. He just, you're going to do this. Okay, Moses is like, okay, I'll be your mouth. Just and he also bitch out Job too. Just like, okay.
Yeah.
It's like, it's it's actually really funny. You just like look at for those like comedic lenses. It's like, so it's good to have levity.
Yeah. There's a few different moments that like are pretty funny. Like there's the moment in Jonah where like Jonah has like finally like given his message to the people of Nineveh and is like sitting down expecting that God's gonna like finally go about doing what he said he was going to do, is wipe out Nineveh off the face of the map. And then Jonah gets disappointed that God doesn't actually do that and actually like is merciful towards the people of Nineveh. And then he like pitches a bit, and then like God gives him a bit of shade from the hot sun, and then like he takes away that shade, and then Jonah pitches a fit again. It's a really funny sort of story, but yeah.
Oh man, in I want to say Samuel, but in the first book of Samuel, it's just like Saul threw spears at David at multiple times, and yet David's just like, he's been divinely anointed. God anointed him, just like this dude is trying to kill you.
Yeah. And he's still coming back whenever Saul's like, look, I need my music boy, come back. And it's like, okay, and then he has to run away from the sphere again.
Sphere. And I think the prophet Samuel actually said something funny to Job. Like he says like to Samuel to Saul, just basically saying like, "Oh, you didn't sacrifice these people? I mean, not didn't sacrifice. You didn't kill all these people and all the gals, but you took them." And just like he said, like, God wanted me to do this." And he's like Samuel's like, "All right, okay, you lied to me, but okay, I'm just gonna let this slide."
But, oh yeah, sure. God told you to do that. Look, I'm the spokesman for God here.
Just yeah, it's stories, just stories upon stories, and it's good to find humor in them. It's
it does like contain the gambit of human emotion within it as well. Like deep tragedy, deep like despair and anxiety, and but also deep religious sort of like inspiration, and sadness and heartbreak and suffering and all those things, and humor as well. So
hey, don't worry, I won't throw a spear at you.
Thank you. Greatly appreciated.
And it's just I guess I want to end on this note. To just summarize what we talk about is that on the problem of evil and the permitting of suffering within the human condition, within human experience, it's us as a people, it's us as individuals to decipher meaning from it and gain knowledge and wisdom from it so we can better ourselves and hopefully better other people. And even if you're older, especially for parents who have to watch your kids making the same mistakes as them, it's best to let them make their own mistakes and come to their own understanding than telling them what is right and wrong. And is the relationship between God and humanity, is that of a father allowing his children to make mistakes and come to their own understanding and meaning. And we as people with the capacity to choose and the capacity to make our own decisions in life, we have to decipher that meaning and go forward and keep on pushing, because life is hard, life is difficult, life is in fact suffering, but we have the tools to endure it all and make it a better place for people we love and people we care about, because without evil in the world, we cannot recognize goodness, and we have to hear it and listen to it and accept it. That's a very hard pill to swallow, and that's what I view to be the reality of the conditions we find ourselves in, these circumstances we find ourselves in. Is there anything you want to end on?
No, a lot of good stuff you were just saying there. If anyone's like interested in, I guess, like further thoughts of mine regarding the problem of evil, I have a few links on my Twitter profile, or like, what is it? It's like a pinned tweet, basically, that has a few different links. One of them being like a 2-hour discussion I had with a friend of mine that's an atheist, sort of like grilling me somewhat on the theodicy that I put forward. But I think it was a really fruitful conversation. And so, if anyone's interested in that, because the problem of evil is a difficult one, and I don't want people to just sort of dismiss it cavalierly. I think that there's It's difficult and one that should be wrestled with and considered thoughtfully. And a lot of like go-to responses by Christians, they'll have some holes in them. And so we should try to find more robust sort of avenues in responding to the problem of evil that are don't have as many holes, hopefully. So yeah.
Hopefully, we are only human.
Yeah.
So,
True.
this is my stream, so I'm probably gonna end this. You ever read Ephesians?
Yeah.
Okay, this is from the King James version of Ephesians because I want to just read chapter 6, the whole thing, because it's actually really short. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor thou father and mother, which is the first commandment with promise, that it may be well with thee, and thou mayest live long on the earth. Ye fathers, provoke not your children to wrath, but bring it up in nurture and admonish of the Lord. Servants, be obedient to them that are your masters according to the flesh, with fear and trembling, in the singleness of your heart, as unto Christ. Not with the eye service as men pleasers, but as servants of Christ, doing the will of God from your hearts, with good will doing service as to the Lord, and not to men, knowing that whatsoever good thing any man doeth, the same shall be received of the Lord, whether he be bond or free. Ye masters, do the same thing unto them, forbearing threatening, knowing that your master also is in heaven, neither is there respects of the person with him. Finally, my brethren, be strong in the Lord, in the power of his might. Put on the whole armor of God, that ye may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. Wherefore, take unto you the whole armor of God, that ye may be able to withstand in the evil day, having done all to stand. Stand therefore, having your loins girt about with truth, and having on the breastplate of righteousness, and your feet shod with preparation of the gospel of peace. Above all, taking the shield of faith, wherewithal shall able to quench all the fiery darts of the wicked, and take the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God, praying always with all prayer, supplication, spirit, watching thereunto, all perseverance and supplication for all the saints. And for me, that utterance may be given unto me, that I may open my mouth boldly to make known the mystery of the gospel, for which I am the ambassador in bonds, that therein I may speak boldly as I ought to speak. But thee also may know my affairs, and how do Tychicus, a beloved brother and faithful minister in the Lord, shall make known to all things, whom I set unto you for the same purpose, that ye may know our affairs, that he might comfort your hearts. Peace be to the brethren, and love with faith, from the God the Father and the Lord Jesus Christ. Grace grace be with them, with all of them that love our Lord Jesus Christ in sincerity. Amen. Yeah, I screwed that up a couple times, but
No, it's good. Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, thanks for coming on my channel. I hope I talk to you again real soon.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks for having me on. It was great.